In the mid-90s, in a small quiet suburb, two brothers, hiding in plain sight and filled with hatred, were about to commit the unthinkable. This is the Freeman brothers' story. In the mid-90s, in a quiet neighborhood of Allentown, Pennsylvania, a family was torn apart in one of the most brutal and senseless crimes the area had ever seen. Two brothers, consumed by hatred and rebellion, along with their cousin, committed an act so vile that it left the community in shock. This is the story of Brian and David Freeman and how their descent into darkness led to the horrific murders of their own parents and younger brother. To the outside world, the Freemans seemed like a typical religious family. Dennis and Brenda Freeman were devout Jehovah's Witnesses, raising their three sons, Brian, David, and Eric, under strict religious principles. Their lives revolved around their faith, and they expected their children to adhere to the same values. But beneath the surface, the Freeman household was a pressure cooker of tension, conflict, and control. Brian, the eldest son, was the first to rebel. By his teenage years, he had grown resentful of his strict upbringing and the rigid rules imposed by his parents. As his frustration grew, so did his anger. Brian began to lash out, distancing himself from his family's beliefs and seeking out new identities that would define him. He shaved his head, covered his body in neo-Nazi tattoos, and embraced the violent and racist ideology of the skinhead movement. He wasn't just acting out, he was declaring war on everything his parents stood for. David, the middle child, wasn't far behind. Though quieter and more reserved than his older brother, David looked up to Brian and soon followed in his footsteps. He too shaved his head, got similar tattoos, and joined the same white supremacist circles. The Freeman brothers became notorious in their small town, not just for their appearance, but for their open defiance of their parents and their increasingly violent behavior. As Brian and David's behavior spiraled out of control, the rift between them and their parents grew wider. Dennis and Brenda tried to intervene, hoping to save their sons from the path that they were on, but their efforts only pushed the boys further away, deepening their resentment and anger. By 1995, the brothers were on a collision course with tragedy, and the fuse was about to be lit. Their younger brother Eric was just 11 years old, a sweet, innocent child who looked up to his older siblings despite their troubling behavior. Eric was caught in the middle of the escalating family conflict, trying to navigate the storm that was brewing in his home, but he had no idea just how dark things were about to get. In February 1995, the tension in the Freeman household reached a breaking point. Brian and David, fed up with their parents' attempts to control them, decided that the only way out was to eliminate the source of their pain. They weren't just planning to run away or start a new life. They were planning murder. With the help of their cousin, 18-year-old Nelson Ben Birdwell, who shared their extremist views, the Freeman brothers hatched a plan to kill their parents and their younger brother. On the night of February 26th, the three young men gathered in the Freeman home, ready to carry out their horrific plan. The three boys returned home after being out to the theater to watch a movie. They were confronted by their mother, Brenda, who began to argue with her sons about Ben being in the home, as she had forbid him from being there. Suddenly, as she came down the stairs, Brian grabbed her and shoved a pair of shorts in her mouth to stifle her screams. He then went on to stab her repeatedly with a steak knife he had retrieved from their kitchen. David and Ben then quickly went upstairs and into the bedroom of Dennis, the father, who was asleep in bed. The two of them proceeded to beat him to death with a metal exercise bar and an aluminum baseball bat. But the most horrifying act was yet to come. Eric, their younger brother, was sleeping in his bedroom, unaware of the carnage happening just down the hall. The boys entered his room, where they proceeded to beat him with a 3-foot pickaxe handle until he was dead, ensuring that no one would be able to testify against them. After the murders, Brian, David, and Birdwell fled the scene, leaving behind a house soaked in blood and the lifeless bodies of their family. They took off in the family car with a 12-gauge shotgun in their possession. They headed west in a desperate bid to escape justice. For several days, the trio evaded capture, sparking a nationwide manhunt that kept the nation on edge. Their escape came to an end in Michigan, where they were arrested without incident on March 1st, 1995. The evidence against them was overwhelming. Not only had they been caught in the stolen car, but they also had been bragging about their crimes to anyone who would listen during their brief time on the run. When the case went to trial, it was clear that these were not impulsive acts of violence, but cold, calculated murders. In court, Brian and David Freeman showed little remorse for their actions. Their defense attempted to argue that the brothers were victims of a harsh upbringing, driven to murder by years of abuse and control, but the jury was unmoved. In 1995, both brothers were convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Birdwell, who had a lesser role in the killings, was convicted of third-degree murder and sentenced to a long prison term. The Freeman family murders shocked the Allentown community and left a lasting scar on those who knew the family. It was a horrifying example of how hatred and extremism can destroy lives and tear families apart. For the Freeman brothers, their path to darkness ended in unimaginable violence, and they will spend the rest of their lives paying for their crimes.